Hello everybody, welcome. We are at Antietam, it's 1:59, and we're trying to show you a bunch of obscure places. This might be the least obscure place that we're going to show you today because we are surrounded by most of the icons of Antietam. Before I tell you that, you're with the American Battlefield Trust. Please share this with your friends, subscribe to our YouTube, or get inspired at battlefields.org. We got Kris White with his windscreen behind the camera over there. We're gonna have another special guest coming on here, as well as we take you around Antietam as much as possible. Look for our videos today and tomorrow, including those that might not have uploaded properly from our earlier YouTube attempts. We are in the middle of the north end of the Antietam National Battlefield Park. Over my right shoulder is the famous Cornfield. Behind me is the East Woods. If you look off in this direction is Antietam Creek way off in the distance. As I come over here, I am looking toward the Moomaw Farm and the Sunken Road. If you come up over here behind me, you might be able to catch a glimpse of the Dunker Church behind me. The Hagerstown Pike is off to my left over here. So you talk about some iconic places, show me more iconic places than the Cornfield and the Dunker Church, and we are right in between them here. Let me back up a little bit because we've already been getting into this a little bit. The Union attack on the morning of September 17th consisted of two and then part of a third corps. Number one, the 1st Corps, Hooker, attacked through the Cornfield. Two, the 12th Corps attacked through the East Woods, and some of them made it through the East Woods and across this very ground right here. In a lot of the melee in the morning, the Confederates are lined up right across this ground where we are. Georgians, Louisianians, Virginians, and others trying to repel the Union coming out of the cornfield behind the camera and themselves pushing into the corn as well. Later in the day, about 9 a.m., only in this battle is 9 a.m. later in the day, here comes the advanced elements of Bull Sumner's 2nd Corps. Again, 2 of his divisions went toward the Sunken Road, 1 came this way, and this is John Sedgwick's guys. They are going to cross this land. They're going to meet with disaster in the West Woods over my left shoulder there. Their commander, Edwin Vose Sumner, commander of the whole Corps. Get out of here, boys, you're in a bad fix. Not exactly military protocol at that point, but that was the situation at the time. So you literally have fighting going on every side of this. This is the West Woods, the East Wood fights. It figures into all the phases of the cornfield, as well as the phases when the Union is attacking the West Woods and falling back from it. It's later an artillery position. And there's just so much going on here. And I think someone's about to grab the camera from Kris, unless he wards me off right here, so he can get into a little bit more detail about the fighting. Don't forget to share this with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Kris White.
Thanks, Gary. And this is a really cool place to be out here, which we call the Epicenter. So if you've seen that name on the video here, the Epicenter really is truly the whirlwind of battle here at Antietam. And we have a really cool spot that we're standing. And this, if you were out here maybe 20 years ago, you might remember if you were at the visitor center behind me, looking out towards the cornfield, towards the north, that's behind the camera. You would have seen a barn and you would have seen trees, a house and everything. Well, that is no longer here. It's because of the members of the American Battlefield Trust who saw the importance of this battlefield land right here that purchased the land and bring it back to its 1862 appearance, then eventually over to the National Park Service. But what makes it so important for us? Like I said, we are in the middle of the action here at Antietam. So behind us, we have the Miller Cornfield behind the camera. Behind me, we have the Dunker Church. In the distance, if we were out here on September 17th of 1862, we would actually be looking at Stephen D. Lee's gun battalion, artillery battalion, who would be lobbing shells up into this area where we're standing. Off to my left was Hauser's Ridge and Nicodemus Heights, and that is going to bring in Confederate artillery fire from this side. So that's going to be a crossfire of Confederate shells. To the north, we would have artillery from the Union guns firing off in this direction, and some from the east. One man is going to dub this artillery hell. So whenever we're in here, we're in a crossfire of artillery. But what makes it even worse is we have a ton of infantry, the foot soldiers, who make up the backbones of both of these armies. And what we'll have coming through here are some of the hardest fighting divisions of the Confederate Army, as well as some new additions to the Union Army of the Potomac. We have some old names, we have some new names, some people you probably know from other battlefields. So starting on the Confederate side, across the road from us, in those West Woods, we're going to have the old Stonewall Jackson division. We're going to have what was left of Richard Ewell's division, who would be up here as well. Richard Ewell's wounded at the Battle of Second Manassas. technically Battle of Groveton, right before the battle. We'll have Isaac Trimble's brigade come across this land. Trimble, too, is wounded right about the same time as Richard Ewell was at Groveton. So we have a guy named Stonewall Jim Walker. Stonewall is his nickname because he tried to get into a duel with Stonewall Jackson prior to the war. So they give him the nickname Stonewall Jim. Jim Walker's going to lead across the ground right below me with some Alabamians, some North Carolinians, some Georgians will be with him, moving off in that direction. Then coming up from behind me, we will start to have some more Georgians under Marcellus Douglas. Marcellus Douglas will come up into this area. He will be killed in action, commanding Lawton's brigade. If you look at the Battle of Antietam, use what's called the order of battle. That's what kind of tells us all the organizations out here. It's very confusing because we're going to talk about Ewell's division, but Richard Ewell's not here. Trimble's brigade, but Trimble's not here. The attrition of these two armies, it's confusing. So don't confuse yourself too much by everyone who may or may not have been here. Take a look at that order of battle and be like, that's how this is all going to play out. So we have Georgians coming up into here. We have Louisianians. One is William Stark. Stark is actually killed not too far from where we're standing, bringing those men up into here. So we have a large amount of Confederates that are piled into the West Woods. They're going to be moving across this epicenter, some of them, to meet the Union soldiers who are coming from my left, from the Miller Cornfield, which is to the north. The initial assaults will be our 1st Corps under Joseph Hooker. Hooker will move his way down towards where we're standing. He is going to receive a lot of fire near from where we're standing. The Confederates who are laying in wait on the edge of David Miller's cornfield. Push those guys back. Then we'll have the new additions to the Army of the Potomac. The 12th Corps, initially commanded by Joseph Mansfield, is now going to be commanded by Alpheus Williams because Mansfield is wounded here in action, mortally wounded, and coming right across near the land where we're standing will be some brand new units like the 125th Pennsylvania, units who have only been in action for a few weeks. They have been raised in July and August of 1862, and this is their first action coming out here. So we're going to have some confusion out on this battlefield. There's a guy you probably heard of from Gettysburg named George Sears Green. He's in charge of a division here at Antietam because, again, everything's a little shuffled. And Green is going to make his way down towards the Dunker Church. George Sears Green will be the hero on Culp's Hill on July 2nd, 1863. There's a monument of him pointing down the hill if you've ever been to the top of Culp's Hill. So Green is moving across this area. But also touching this land or coming very close to it will be that 2nd Corps that Gary talked about, Edwin Voss Sumner. Bull Sumner, because he either has a bull head because he was hit in the head by a bullet, didn't penetrate, bounced off, or it's because of his booming voice. So I like the bullet in the head story, but you can use whichever one you think is true. Sumner will move those men that we talked about in one of our other videos earlier today. He is going to move across in a compact column, and he is going to get slammed into by Lafayette McLaw's division of James Longstreet's wing of the Corps of the Army here. And he's also going to run into guys like Jubal Early, Lee's battle man, one of only 2 men to get a nickname from Robert E. Lee, the other one being his old war horse, wearing a slipper not too far from where we are, sitting on his horse, named James Longstreet. So we have a lot of action in here. So we're talking about some of the most famous units of the American Civil War. The Philadelphia Brigade came right through here. We have what will become John Brown Gordon's brigade. Most of you know that he is down in the sunken road, about to be wounded 5 times here at Antietam. Survive those wounds, he'll go and take over that brigade that Marcellus Douglas is leading out here after Douglas is killed and Gordon comes back to the Army in 1863. We'll have George Sears Green, as I said. He'll be down into this area. Stonewall Jackson was close by. He could have come up into here. We don't have proof, but he may have been up here as well because this is a perfect platform to look around. You can see the next ridgeline up towards the Miller farm. You can see back towards Stephen Lee's artillery. So this was really the epicenter of battle. We have men coming in from the East Woods, coming in from the Miller Cornfield. We have men crossing into the West Woods, out of the West Woods, and of course the converging artillery fire that would have been raining in here. We can estimate at least 50,000 artillery shells were fired here at the Battle of Antietam, and there's no doubt that many of them were zeroed in on this ground on the morning of September 17th of 1862. And I'll bring on Bryan Cheeseboro. Bryan's been with us. I think he has a question for us. I don't know. Gary's pointing at me.
I'm just going like this.
Yeah. I do have a question for you, Kris. Great summary. And listening to you, both you and Gary, talk about everything around us in this epicenter, it almost reminds me of like being at like a Hollywood party or something like that. Oh my gosh, there's so-and-so, and there's so-and-so, and there's so-and-so, and it's really, really cool. But also thinking about all the different famous generals who are here, some of them later to command the Army of the Potomac, or later to rise in the Confederate Army or whatever. Just a quick question. Who do you feel, in your opinion, exceeded expectations here at the Battle of Antietam? And who also do you feel, either side, either way, didn't live up to expectations? Just a question, pick your brain. What do you think?
Number one, who didn't live up to them, may have been right on this land. I know his troops were right adjacent to it, and that's John Jones. There are two Confederate John Joneses, John R. Jones, John M. Jones. John M. wasn't here. Nickname, Rum Jones. What's he like to do? He likes to drink. But John R. Jones was here, and he decided to leave the battle after an artillery shell exploded near him. A few months later at the Battle of Chancellorsville, he has an ulcerated leg and can't take to the field, and he never does again with the Army of Northern Virginia. There were some accusations of cowardice. You know, this is a tough place to be, so he definitely didn't live up to the Confederate expectations out here, I think. Another one who didn't live up to it, Union side, I always think, is George McClellan. The fish stinks from the head, as Jim Lighthizer used to say at the Trust, and George McClellan was not taking the active role that I believe he needed to. He doesn't need to be out here on the front lines. That's not the place for him, but he needed to have a more active role in seeing the Army. Someone who did a pretty good job, I think, but went in a little bit too soon was Joe Hooker. He's the best corps commander on the Union side, I believe. He's the hardest hitting, hardest fighting. Joe Hooker might not be the brightest guy in the Union Army, but man, when he goes into a combat, he goes in and he hits hard. On the Confederate side of things, I think that the two men who were probably appreciated here at this battle is D.H. Hill, who has to send men up into this area. Some of his guys were right off to my right, and trying to hold that center. And I always think that James Longstreet never gets enough credit out on the battlefields. Anytime Stonewall Jackson's out here, who does a really good job, he always casts the largest shadow. It's like living in a lunar eclipse.
You know, I'd like to say myself, the person I feel, at least on the Union side, who really exceeds expectations, in my opinion, is Ambrose Burnside. He has a tough position to take. He takes it, he crosses the bridge, he takes that high ground. He doesn't hold it though, because APO shows up and doesn't get help from McClellan. But I really feel that, I know Burnside has kind of a bad reputation among some, he's an idiot or whatever. I don't think so. But I really like that he fought hard and took some casualties. Oh, I'm sorry. Took casualties, he fought hard. Sorry, folks. But anyway, that's my opinion, though. Just answering my own question. I really feel like Ambrose Burnside was somebody who stayed on the field, put his men in at a tough position, crossing that bridge, Burnside's bridge. You got to cross the bridge with your name on it, right? And then taking the high ground, the bluff across the creek there. So,
yeah,
thanks.
And for those who are gonna give Bryan a hard time about Ambrose Burnside, let me step back a minute. Ambrose Burnside, up until September of 1862, and especially after December of 1862, was not as bad as people make him out to be. He fought very well in 1861 at First Manassas. He fought down along the North Carolina coast, did very well down there. That's what's going to bring him up into the Eastern Theater, as it were. Here at Antietam, he has a military crossing. Yeah, everyone says, cross Antietam, it's easy, you can wade across. Remember, you have to get men, horses, materiel, cannons, everything you need, and you need a stable source to get across that creek, and that's going to have to be the lower bridge, the Rohrbach Bridge, or as we know it today, the Burnside Bridge. The execution was flawed at times, but man, Burnside wasn't as bad as people make him out to be just yet in the war. The wheels will really come off a little bit later, unfortunately. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Ooh, they split like the Red Sea. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. That was Kris White and Bryan Cheeseboro chatting about the Battle of Antietam and some performance here on what we call the Epicenter track. Now, first of all, it's good to see so many of you on. We've had every problem in the world, and today, apparently, if you move 3 feet away from 4 bars, you're at 1 or 0 bars. So thanks for putting up with us. However much it frustrates you, it's 10 times worse for us, I assure you. But we will have the full videos of everything we've shot up in the wake of the event in case anything got missed. Now, a few things I want to talk about here, because this is an incredible piece of property. And look, I see a licensed battlefield guide over there, a guy named Lucas, good friend of ours as well, using this land. This was not even accessible 8 years ago. Before we get into that, though, let me just say how important this land is. Sorry, this one's not an upper, but about 80 yards off to my left front, this photo was taken. William Fresnito discovered the spot here. It's looking toward the Hagerstown Pike, and it shows an unburied Confederate soldier next to the grave of a Union soldier. Look, the Confederate is unidentified. The Union soldier's grave is marked. We know that is John M. Clark of the 7th Michigan. We have pictures of him. And to the victor, this is what happens. Both sides buried their own dead first, and then they would bury those of the enemy. You're more likely to be identified by friends as opposed to the enemy. And maybe an equally, some people say even sadder scene was also taken on this. If we can come right over here, we're going to tip our hat on our next special guest there, is a photo taken about 100 yards off, straight in front of you, looking toward the east woods, of a very much not alive horse. This horse, people mentioned it, seeing a horse that looked alive out in the field, and it caught the attention of Alexander Gardner and his crew working for Matthew Brady, showing the east woods in the distance. So remember, if you look out that way now, you're not seeing a whole lot of woods. There were woods there at the time, and that'll become important as we bring on our next guest. Before we do that, one last thing. Let me just say that here we are, at this area that was inaccessible, and therefore, when the Confederates came here and started to mark this battlefield, they put their monuments over there. A monument to Texas, a monument to Georgia, and more recently in, I think, 2012, a monument to the 11th Mississippi. See, Southerners monumented battlefields, especially in the North, a little bit differently, and they are going to sometimes just put up one monument for one whole state, and that's what Texas did. That's what Georgia did here at this battlefield, and the 11th Mississippi was put in on private land at the time. You probably can't see over my shoulder, but Stark Miller, I'll bet you're watching there, is set back a little bit because this was private land, but it is not private land anymore. And to talk about that, let me bring on my friend and the president of the American Battlefield Trust, David Duncan.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Chris. Hey, everybody. It's a thrill for me, of course, to hear the history of this battle and this battlefield. But even more so, it's a thrill at a very deep and visceral level to be at this place, one of the most important battlefields in world history, on the 159th anniversary of the actual battle. I'm going to talk to you very briefly, not so much about the history of the battle, but the preservation history. And Gary mentioned, for many years, decades, this land was privately owned. And that has a very special name in a national park setting like this. It's a piece of property called an inholding. It's a large triangular piece of property, 44 acres. But when they created the park, for whatever reason, it ended up that this piece of property, this central, as we named it, epicenter, remained in private hands. Probably most people who visited the battlefield for decades, again, thought this was part of the park. They thought the farmhouse and the farm buildings probably were wartime structures and were here at the time of the battle. And so most people probably just didn't understand why they couldn't access this property, why they couldn't walk across and do the trails. But it was a farm. It belonged to someone just like you own your house at home. You wouldn't want a bunch of people traipsing around on your property. So for many, many years, privately owned. In 2015, we had been in very close contact with the landowners, and finally in 2015 they decided that it was time to sell their property. And as often happens in these cases, we as a private nonprofit organization, this is what we do. This is our reason for being. We can often move faster, raise the money faster, and buy a piece of property like this. The preservation threat was that if we hadn't saved this property, again, it's just like a piece of property anywhere else, a mile or so off this battlefield, the private landowner could have sold it to someone else, and they could have come in and torn down the existing old farmhouse and barn and put up a new, as we derisively call them, McMansion, right here in the middle, the epicenter of the Antietam battlefield, and that would have been a catastrophe. So we knew we had to move fast. We knew we had to be effective. The the specifics of this deal, not to bore you too much, but in case you're interested, again, it's a 44-acre piece of property, triangular in shape, touching every major landmark of this part of the battlefield. The purchase price, I believe, was somewhere in the neighborhood of about $510,000. But we also knew we were going to have to raise extra money for the restoration in terms of tearing down the buildings that existed. And then, as Garry mentioned earlier, also to restore the property, which is something else we like to do with the replanting of the East Woods there. So in all, it was about a $575,000 project. Many of you who are members of the American Battlefield Trust know that we love to get matching money, and primarily from the government. Unfortunately, the government matching grant programs are only for parcels of battlefield land that are outside boundaries of national parks. That's a question I get all the time. Well, gosh, isn't the battlefield completely safe? No. When you go to a Gettysburg or Antietam, keep in mind always that when they created those original battlefields, they did not get every acre of important land. Obviously, we're standing at the perfect example of that. So in this instance, in an in-holding property at a national park, it is incumbent upon us as the nonprofit to raise 100% of the money. There were no matching funds. And I can say that thanks to a lot of very generous people, including one very prominent one, Dr. Mary Abro, who's on our board, and also a member of the local preservation group here, the Save Historic Antietam Foundation, and all of our members across the country, nationwide. You guys stepped up, helped us raise that money in record time so that we could buy the property, so that we could restore it. I'm standing here on the ground, Kris. I'm going to walk around. Just, right behind me, you would have seen the original farmhouse. It was in somewhat of a dilapidated condition, and off to my right was where the falling down barn stood as well. Here we are now, 6 years later. You cannot tell that those structures were ever here. So it's a remarkable preservation and restoration project, all made possible by the great members of the American Battlefield Trust. So just real quick, and I know we've talked a little bit about the importance of this ground, but don't take my word for it. Don't even take Garry's or Kris's or anybody else's word for it. When we were launching the campaign to save this ground, I reached out to a lot of the most prominent historians in our field. And I want to read a couple of them to you, just so you can hear what those experts had to say about this piece of property. The first one is Jim McPherson. And I think most people who are watching us here today will know who that is. Battle Cry of Freedom, Pulitzer Prize winning work, and just one of the high priests of our business. Jim was talking about how he's given many tours of the Antietam battlefield. He always starts in the North Woods, comes across the Cornfield. And he said at that time, before we bought and restored the property, today we can't see the same view because the house and barn of the Epicenter tract blocked the way. To acquire this property and restore the same view that Hooker and his men saw on that fateful morning would be one of the greatest coups in the history of battlefield preservation. Bob Crick, again, a prominent historian, especially specializing in the Army of Northern Virginia, of course. Kind of the same thing. He was talking about how he always started tours here at Antietam on the road, the Cornfield Road right behind me, but was always frustrated that he could never get onto this property. He says, for nearly a half century, I have described the savage maelstrom of battle on that field to tour groups gathered along its boundary without access to the ground. The Trust's acquisition of this land must be accounted among the most spectacular preservation coups in memory. So 2 prominent historians calling this a preservation coup. The last one, our good friend Ed Bars, who passed away last year, Ed said that any way today's visitor looks at it, this 44-acre tract is as vital to an understanding and interpretation of the morning's fight for Miller's Cornfield and the Westwood slaughter as any other land that has been preserved at Antietam. Any development there would destroy the integrity of what has been saved before. I've always wondered what would happen to this property. My opinion This is one of the most important actions the Trust has taken in a long, long time. So, 3 high priests of our business testifying to the absolute importance to save this property. And the ultimate disposition, of course, which has now happened, is we saved it and it is now part of the national park here, as it should be. It belongs to the American people. Our members bought it, paid for it, restored it, saved it, and now it's in the Park Service forever so that people can come out here, you know, like the tour group behind us again. That was unthinkable 6 years ago. And now there's walking trails that have been mowed through the grass. Anybody can come out and enjoy this piece of property. So my thanks to our members. A pitch for you: if you're not a member yet, and if you care about this kind of stuff, you ought to be a member of the American Battlefield Trust. And I don't just say that because I'm a president, I say it because I'm a member, and I give my money to help save these places. So please join us in this incredibly important work for our country. So, Gary?
Good. Thanks, David. Speaking of high priests, you know, you've been called some good things. VIP guest, and shout out to Dave Duncan. So, well done.
Thank you.
Thanks, David. Let's continue this high priest theme, because the next guest we have, and I know we have some connectivity issues, so we're going to keep it short here at this point. But, you know, you talk about a high priest of Antietam. There might be 2 of them, and this is at least one of them. He might say he's the high priest, but he's too humble, far too humble. Dr. Tom Clemens, Save Historic Antietam Foundation. And let me just ask you, Tom, come on, you know, it wasn't just that we got the land. I mean, I think people know that the Trust came here and actually planted some trees. I'll talk about that in a second, but it wasn't that easy. There were, you know, lines of trees across this place. We needed help with the structures.
Yes, and I got to say, first of all, we're just so thrilled with ABT and the purchase of this property. Our organization is quite small. We put in some money with it, but we put in a lot of what I call sweat equity. There was a very dense tree line that ran from this barn all the way down to the Smoketown Road. You could not see the east woods from the west woods, vice versa. And we had a group of volunteers, probably 40 different people at one time or another. We came out here for weeks with chainsaws and axes and cut down and trimmed and got rid of a lot of those trees, only the biggest ones that we couldn't take down on our own, to help restore this property. Because as Dave Duncan said, buying it's one thing, restoring it to its original appearance is a whole nother thing. We helped pay for that demolition of the house and the barn, and we're just very thrilled to be a part of what is probably the greatest piece of property to enter the Park Service's hands in decades. This farm was actually built by one of the Miller's granddaughters, subdividing the original Miller farm, and it's been in private hands literally since the battle. Behind me, you can see the Park Service's interpretation station, and you notice that it is oriented to face north. Whatever you do, don't turn around and look at this land where there was more blood spilled than in the cornfield, because they didn't own it. And I don't mean this as a derogatory thing, but the Park Service doesn't interpret land they don't own. They didn't own this. So, in fact, in the long-range plans of the park, there is plans to move that visitor's contact station or tour stop to this spot here, because you get a much better view of this entire part of the morning fighting, and we can now interpret this land because you, me, the American people now own this land forever. And I can't be more thrilled about it.
Cool, thanks. I mean, and the end result of this, as David mentioned, as I mentioned, you know, there's tour groups can come out here. Why? Because the National Park Service has put these trails in. They couldn't put them in before. And this trail doesn't just come out to this tree. It goes back toward the cornfield. It goes all the way across it toward the east woods. All really important stuff. And the last thing, at least I want to say, and I'll look for anybody else that wants to say anything else, is that if you take a step forward, I'm nervous to, because we'll probably lose the feed. How dare we? Off in that direction. You can see the more mature growth of the historic footprint of the East Woods. And as I mentioned earlier, the East Woods also went all the way across this Epicenter property and actually over above Moomaw's farm over there. But you might be able to see some budding trees on either side of this large tree trunk behind us. We dare not walk around it because we don't know what will happen. But we worked with the Maryland Highway Transportation Association, and they put in the trees. They care for the trees. We put up a historic fence that was there, and we are now regrowing the East Woods. And maybe thereafter the Park Service will regrow their portion of the East Woods on the south side as well. So we are really working bit by bit to restore this battlefield. And we appreciate you sticking with us through our connectivity issues throughout the day. We have lots of videos up, and every video will be posted in full in the wake of the event. I'm looking around to see it. Nobody's trying to get my attention, so I think that's good. So thanks to Annalise behind the camera. Thanks to Kris, David, Tom, and even Bryan, who came out to ask questions, and our intern Jeremy as well, who hasn't even come on, but he's checking connectivity for us. I think he needs to do a better job. Thank you all for watching and for supporting battlefield preservation. Share this with your friends and get inspired at battlefields.org.